Yeah, I feel like Christianity is kind of newer than, I mean, obviously it's newer than Judaism. And I was looking at like the 613 Jewish commandments. And there's some in there. Like, I feel like Christianity is like a revamped, condensed, clickbait version of the 613.
I mean,
You know? It's like, because the
I
Jews, they had some things about not using women as like property, not using them as slaves or something. So there's
I mean, it was a step in the right direction. It wasn't really it wasn't a fix. Women in Judaism are not exactly equals.
yeah, it was sloppily. There's a lot of them, a lot of commandments.
It's a stop. Yeah. There's a lot of rules.
Yeah.
I think either side of Christianity, you have Islam and Judaism, both of which are very prescriptive religions, right? So the response of Muslims has been to lean into the rules and become insane. And the response of Jews, I think, has just been forget it. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Throwing things all over the office. The response of Jews has just been, oh, forget about it. It's fine. You know, so Jews are all now secular because it's just too much trouble to go through with it all.
Right. That's why I think Christianity is a more polished version of it, because they just kept tacking on all these extra commandments. Oh shit, we don't forget what these guys did to our fucking don't forgive these people. They just kept adding rules.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. There's some accuracy in that. And also, you know, I think Christianity just better reflects and fits human nature. Of course, each of these Judeo-Christian faiths will claim that they are the refined or perfected version of the previous one. Right. So, you know, you find Christians who talk about quote unquote perfecting the Jews. And then you'll find, and then of course, Islam considers itself the final revelation. The final revelation is the final perfect and unalterable word of God, and it considers itself perfected, the perfected Judeo-Christian tradition. So much so that everyone is born Muslim, and so converting to Islam is called reversion, not conversion. To Muslims, and that's why converting away is a punishable apostasy, because it's just like unthinkable, you know.
Well, it makes sense. That's why it's so rigid and strict, and why it's so
right. Because this is the arrogance that comes with believing that your holy book and the Hadith and the Sunnah together represent the final, perfect, and unalterable word of God. What that means is you can't be wrong. There's nothing else coming.
So speaking of that,
again, and change anything, and this is why Islam is frozen in time in a way.
Right, exactly.
Because of those three words: final.
So
perfect,
that makes me wonder, like, if that's the perfect word of God, you're not a Bible literalist, are you?
Well, no, because I mean, pretty much every Christian, except for a couple of small pockets of insanity, they know the Bible was written by people.
You're not a fundy.
They have different versions of the same events. No, but the Bible was written by people, some of whom have slightly different versions of the same event, even though they were all there. And this is this, by the way, is the the Gospels is the origin of that Kurosawa movie, right? Is Ran, where there's a bunch of different people telling the story of the same thing that happened, and the shogun has to decide what actually went down. That comes from the Gospels, right? Where you've got, it's about the fallibility of witnesses. So the Bible is this work of literature, that shows how different people can have slightly different interpretations and accounts of the same thing that happened. And this is why Christians will sometimes refer to the Bible as an invitation, right? It's kind of like, it's something to draw you in and get you off thinking about people, about literature, about how everything works, rather than here's how to live, here's what to do it or die. The Quran was supposedly given directly to Muhammad, and it's the final, perfect, and unalterable word of God. Except it's more complicated than that, because actually, it didn't come from Allah; it came via the angel Gabriel in the Islamic tradition. So that's already one, and we all know how Chinese whispers works, right? So that's already one mediating layer. That's already a problem that they have, because it could be final, perfect, and unalterable, but it's hearsay. but it's because and in every tradition, Satan, Iblis, exists in Islam too, which means that angels are capable of defying the will of God, which means that Muhammad had no idea whether Gabriel was telling him the Quran as God actually wanted it. To say nothing of the fact that large chunks of it are plagiarized from the Old Testament, as Christopher Hitchens used to love to point out. So there's all kinds of problems when you make these huge claims for your religious texts, and the Christians typically, on the whole, especially Catholics, don't do that so much because it's stupid.
Unless you're super fundamental, like ChickFilA obviously got in trouble because they have some homophobic beliefs, positions, whatever.
I don't think they have homophobic positions. I think that they donated to like traditional marriage or whatever. But I share their view. I don't think that. I mean, I'm quote unquote married. It's a state marriage.
So that's where I'm trying to lead to.
I don't really think the state should have any role in marriage whatsoever. I think it's a holy sacrament, a religious institution, and I am under no illusions that my marriage is a sacrament in the eyes of God. And if churches were the only people performing marriages, I would not be married and I would not seek a marriage. But since we live in a society where I can get tax breaks, damn right I'm going to do it.
Right.
I understand that it's not a holy sacrament.
I mean, we live in the real world. Why not take if there's not much of a stigma and you get tax breaks, if the only people mad at you are super fundamental, like, so why is it that
I think that God will be perfectly fine with me seeking to reduce my exposure to tax, given how tax. No, I do really. I mean, I know that sounds. I'm
listening.
Given how taxes are spent, funding lesbian dance troupes and welfare and illegal immigration, and given the and Planned Parenthood, given where taxes go, I think God would be quite happy with me legally reducing my exposure to tax as much as possible. So
maybe the Jewish God. I don't know about the.
Well, I think the Christian God would give me he wouldn't give me necessarily a pass on the sodomy, but he might well give me a pass on avoiding paying. On legally reducing my exposure to taxes that go to pay for abortions. Yeah, I think
totally. I guess what I'm trying to get to, my real question is, where do you get this belief that the Bible is inherently anti-homosexuality? Like you just said, sodomy. There's only like a couple verses, isn't there?
Typically, people quote Leviticus. Right. There are a couple of verses about this, and obviously, as a Catholic, your teaching comes from the Church, because the Church is the key to unlocking the Bible into your relationship with God, right? So Protestants have a direct personal relationship with God that doesn't require a priest, so they can just read the Bible and pray, and that's okay. They're Christians; they have a relationship with God; they're good. To get to heaven, to receive salvation in the Catholic Church, it requires the Church, right? You have to go through the Church. So there's a church authority in Catholicism that teaches, based on the Bible, based on also the Church Fathers, and blah, blah, blah. There's a whole body of stuff that eventually becomes church teaching, and church teaching is this is sinful. But
that's it though, just because it was passed on traditionally over roots.
It's because the Bible.
If it's only a couple verses, and you said you're open to different interpretations, I'm just wondering where you get so.
It's not that there's two lines that have been spun out into homo. There's all kinds of reasons for this. It's not the proper relation between men and women, and what church teaching and God would want to do in almost all Christian traditions and most religions is lay out the proper relations between men and women, right? And the proper relations between men and women are, by and large, in most religious traditions, the faithful, long-term, cohabiting, child-producing fidelity of a man and a woman in within a holy sacrament, within some kind of contract or agreement or covenant, right, with one another. Why? Because this is how we were created. This is what our bodies are for. This is how best to fulfill our spiritual potential and to aside from the fact that it's also the best way to build civilizations and societies, right? It's not an accident that the West has accomplished what it has, because it's based on Christianity, which is the religion, in my view, which most closely dovetails with how to build a healthy, happy, flourishing civilization. Now, keeping the holy sacrament of marriage, if you like, is the most sacred institution in the tradition, and it's the thing on which sorry, I keep doing this. I'm a gesticulator. I apologize for the noise to your listeners. I'm going to put that down now. The family is the fundamental building block of society, not the individual.
Okay.
So it's important to keep that family unit looking like it ought to, right? Which requires some rules about the sorts of relations or unions that fall outside that pattern. I mean, it's just, there are some rules to follow based on what God has intended for men and women, right? And I sign up to all this stuff.
Okay.
I agree with it. I recognize that I don't live it, and that's between me and my confessor priest. But I think the problem, something that frustrates me, and I know that frustrates Nick Fuentes, who I was interviewing last night, that we've mentioned, and a lot of young conservatives, is that you've now look. In 2015-16, I was kind of playing the gay conservative in a sort of high camp way to rub the left's nose in identity politics, saying, look, what you believe is clearly nuts, because look at me. I'm funny, I'm handsome, I'm gay, I'm blah, 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 but I don't agree with you. This like breaks the laws of leftist physics, right? So that was the point. But now you've got these turning point guys who are just like, I'm gay and I'm black and I'm a Republican. Don't you want me? And they're not ironic about it. They don't get what they're doing. They literally, they read my performance in 2015-16 and didn't see the layers to it. And therefore, they still can't understand why people like me so much, because most people at home are much smarter. And so my view on all of this is, look, I know what the church teaches, and I know that I don't match it, but I want to share with other people what is clearly the best way to live possible, rather than, let's say, as the right would say, leaning into my degeneracy, which I think is the problem that a lot of people have with these like turning point campus speakers who are like pea-brained microorganisms.
I mean, I guess I get what you're saying. Like, there's a lot of gay Republicans who are still pretty left. They still are progressive on the issue.
They're leftists.
Compared to you.
They're opportunistic fags.
Like, what you're saying confirms that you are, in that sense, you're a fundamentalist Christian.
No, I'm not a fundamentalist. I'm just a Christian.
Fine, we don't have to use that label if you don't want to.
It's a big difference. It's important.
Was it?
Yeah, I mean, calling somebody a fundamentalist Christian versus calling somebody a Christian is yes. I mean, yes, it is.
Right. I don't want to put the label on it, but it just sounds like
it seems like what you've done is you've kind of shunted categories. You've said, well, you're Christian if you kind of semi-believe it. You're a fundamentalist Christian if you actually believe it, right?
Sure.
So a Christian is somebody who goes to church twice a year. I don't think so. Right. So I think a Christian is somebody who actually believes it, and a fundamentalist Christian is a whole other thing. I think
so. They're not Christians.
I think we're just talking in slightly jilted categories.
Right. We got to get the language. I get what you're saying, though. Now, if you're either a Christian or not.
And I'm not desperate to nitpick. I just think it's important that we understand who we're talking about.
Okay, sounds good. But yeah, I think you answered that pretty well. I mean, it's probably the most. So, and then, do you think like homosexuality is like a psychological disease? Do you?
I think obviously it has some elements of nature and nurture.
Okay. Yeah.
From a theological point of view, I guess I would I would see it as a test, and the correct answer to which is celibacy, probably, or join the priesthood. I think that if I were living a more virtuous life, maybe, and I know that I'm a great teacher of people. I've always mentored, younger journalists and all the rest of it. I think that I maybe should have joined the priesthood in a less reprehensible life. Perhaps I would have joined the priesthood or something, and tried to give myself in that way instead of having a family. I think that's probably a good thing for gays to do.
So you admit, so basically in your eyes, if you allow yourself to, be in a gay relationship, that's sinning. Yeah, and that's why it's a good idea to be celibate.
Yeah. No, so this idea of loving the sinner but hating the sin means, the guy can show up to church. If you're not in a state of grace, you probably shouldn't take communion, but you shouldn't receive the Eucharist. Excuse me, but you don't get shunned from the church or anything like that. That happens sometimes in the South, but it doesn't really happen in Catholic churches, because I think mainly because Catholics know they're sinners, right? This whole concept of original sin and Adam and stuff that people find so weird about the Catholic Church, actually it's one of the best things, because it levels everybody out. It's like everybody in here is a sinner, and we're all just trying to do the right thing, rather than, and this is, Evelyn Waugh said stuff like this, people go to the Catholic Church. People join like a Protestant church because they think they're good, and they go to a Catholic church because they know they're not, right? This is a fundamental difference between evangelicals and Catholics. Catholics start from a position of, I need to get better, right? Whereas there's often that kind of puffed up self-righteousness from evangelicals that they share sometimes with Muslims, of that sort of, that sort of impenetrable self-righteousness, which you just don't see very much from Catholics, which is why Catholic churches are such welcoming places to everybody, and sometimes other churches are not.
So
But the act itself is sinful, sure.
Were you raised Catholic, or did you develop
Yes.
it on your? Okay, so this was something that you didn't like rebel against your.
No, but I did drifted from it for a long time when I did kind of. But then I guess I was raised Catholic, didn't think too much about it or care too much about it, and then came back to it later in life as a product of thought and consideration and life experience.